When shock and awe becomes shock and awful. Let's take a moment to get a grip and get ready for the oncoming storm. Hi, it's the Urban Lady Prepper. I help single moms and solo women with practical emergency preparedness. But of course, all are welcome here to be better prepared for whatever happens next. Stay tuned. Well, we were promised shock and awe, and it's been shock and awful. What we're experiencing is called flooding the zone. This tactic involves releasing so much news that is upsetting, radical, or unexpected that it leaves the listeners confused, drained, and ultimately too frustrated to know what to do next. Here's some practical information to get you started on protecting yourself. Everyone, get your affairs in order. Make plans for your family based on the worst-case scenario. Stockpile food and water. Prepare to grow at least some of your food. Vet your disaster team. Get your real ID before May 7th because after that date, you can no longer travel domestically with just your driver's license. This can be done at your local DMV. Make sure your driver's license and passport are current. Do not wait. If you're of the Brown persuasion and are U.S. born, damn it, I hate to say this, but carry a notarized copy of your passport or birth certificate because your driver's license does not prove citizenship. Have the notary write that they check those documents before notarizing the copy. But if you do not have a passport, get one. Spend the money. Do not carry your actual passport and birth certificate on you. You don't want to risk losing them. Now is not the time to take risks. 3 states, Florida, Texas, and Georgia, have the right to stop and demand proof of citizenship from anyone. Good luck. Now, I'm going to talk very frankly. With all the talk of DEI, it's damaging and disgusting projects on people qualified for the job but may fit under that banner. DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, was not to give unqualified people positions they didn't deserve. It doesn't mean Black people jobs they didn't earn or were unqualified for. It was to give opportunity to qualified people who would ordinarily be overlooked because of their race, color, sex, income level, if they had a disability or were a veteran, etc. Actually, the most famous DEI hire that you know of right now is second in command. He got his hand up because of a DEI program that brought in poor people from Appalachia into good schools, and then he got into Yale through the DEI program for veterans. Folks, there's nothing worse than a ladder puller. Considering the truly unqualified people who are being cornholed into our top government positions, for any of them to call anyone a DEI hire is pretty fucking rich. Oh, and for the record, the biggest benefactor of the DEI program? White women. And since Order 11246 was removed, which barred discrimination based on race, sex, color, religion, etc., on top of losing DEI, finding work, especially in our current climate where men are so openly hostile to women, should be fun. So, if you're a white lady cheering the demise of DEI, well, you just celebrated making your job search that much harder. Hell, some of you might find yourself out of a job now that they don't have to include you on their staff, and you have no recourse. Congratulations. Many people may have spent this weekend celebrating the mass deportations. People who love seeing families ripped apart. There's a whole nother topic about how only certain immigrants are going to be targeted, and how other immigrants of a particular demographic are completely ignored even though they have their populations. Still, like most from that particular demographic, they're not worried. As many of us tried to tell folks, these mass deportations were never about criminality, it was about color. And also, as predicted, to reach the huge quotas that have been set, there's also the issue of people who haven't been convicted of a crime being deported as well. Those people who thought only criminals and terrorists were going to be deported may be a little surprised. But for those who ultimately want anyone brown gone, and us woke folk, we knew what was going to happen because America has done this before. It was called Operation Wetback. Yes, that's what it was called. And not only were folks rounded up in a similar fashion that's being done now, but many of those folks were deported to a country they weren't even from. They also sent people that were born in America, whether they spoke Spanish or not. Anyway, as predicted, food prices were already increasing, But now will be worse because the people being deported used to pick our food, clean our hotels, and work in our restaurants doing all the work you don't want to do. Right now, too many Americans are excited and seek hiling all over the internet instead of running to get these jobs that were being stolen from them, right? No. Again, it was never about the jobs. It was about the brown people. ICE's raid on a California farm provided some immigrants to deport, but it also led to other people not going to work for fear of being deported. 75% of that labor force is gone, leaving many ripened oranges roasting in the sun. Hope y'all don't like oranges, because they don't have enough people to pick them. So now your oranges will go up in price just like everything else. And yes, egg prices will continue to skyrocket. There's a couple of reasons for this, as I've mentioned several times before, but I recently found out that one of the biggest donors to the new administration's campaign was the egg and poultry industry. I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to put two and two together. There's no incentive to bring the prices down because they're making money. Your suffering means nothing. They know that you'll continue to find a way to buy eggs because it's something you're used to having. You will see that people who were so happy to watch others suffer will soon begin suffering themselves. The services many of them need are on the chopping block. They thought that they would be the exception. These exception people believe that regardless of what the rule, the law, or the parameters are, even if they fall within them, for some reason, they're the exception to that. Just look at the farmers begging to let the government keep their migrant workers. For some reason, they thought that voting to have migrants deported didn't mean they're migrants. No, it doesn't make any sense. Certain groups are finding out the hard way that they're not the exception. If you're not a millionaire, you're just as vulnerable as the groups you're happy to see punished for merely existing. There are more white folks on SNAP than anyone else, and they require things like free school lunches to make ends meet. There are those on Medicaid, and some were so happy that the others would suffer if they got rid of Obamacare that they didn't realize it was the same thing as the Affordable Care Act, which many of them need. Those folks are now in a full-blown panic because it's starting to hit them, and it's hitting them where they're most vulnerable. They didn't feel that the promised cuts he said to their faces he was going to do, for some reason, wouldn't apply to them. I don't know what's a bigger illness, racism or believing you're always an exception. Wait, there's one bigger than that, and it has been burned into their psyche. It's the ingrained belief that it's better to lose one's rights than to allow another group access to the same rights. Someone once said that giving rights to someone else doesn't mean less for you. It's not pie. But our largest demographic didn't get that memo, and they continued over decades to be willing to give up so much so that the others couldn't have it. This attitude works so well that now many middle-class kids who may have wanted to get their own home are still at their parents' house because they've been priced out of the market. This has worked so well that many couldn't afford to send their kids to college. It works so well that many have table waiting jobs that don't even provide minimum wage, and you need tips to survive. The American tipping system was instituted so restaurant owners didn't have to pay former slaves. So not only were they not paid, but giving the patrons the option to tip meant the servers would barely make money waiting tables. People loved watching freed slaves still serve them and be dependent, and business owners liked it because they could pay the workers next to nothing. So why change it? Now, decades and decades later, it's still in place. And guess who's suffering from this system now too? This mentality, this illness, is why all of us regular folk can't have or do nice things. We wouldn't be in our current position if folks weren't so cruel. Again, if you're not a millionaire, we're all going to suffer. And for those who have and will continue to profit from the misery, the cruelty is the point. So how does this relate to prepping? It should be obvious as food becomes more expensive, as goods become more expensive, and as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, certain things will become unavailable. Jobs will become harder to find, and as hard as that is, folks will have to make decisions about schooling. If the Department of Education is gutted, or your county loses its funding, which almost happened this week, you must make arrangements for your children, especially if they have an IEP and you depend on the free lunch program. If you're in a double-income household, you got spoiled having those daily babysitters known as teachers. With no teachers, what are you going to do? You'll be forced into either homeschooling, which means a parent has to stay home and you lose that income, or pay for a private school, something else to add to that tight budget. Did I mention they'll probably come from NOAA and FEMA next too? Of course, they want to make it seem like they're the worst things ever. Still, anyone who has benefited from either service will realize how terrible it is to eliminate them. Without NOAA, or NOAA, we'd be unaware of developing disasters like hurricanes. While we do have our pirates with their own weather stations and their own equipment, who's to say that they may not be able to share that information in the future because the government will restrict it or not allow it at all? The resources NOAA has that report and track extreme weather events to help us prepare will no longer exist. Since extreme weather is projected to cause $38 trillion of damage by 2049, this is a disaster in itself. The current administration has said that the states should be able to handle their disasters, which should concern red states because they suffer the most from them. Some counties are already too poor to have an emergency plan in place right now. Unless you have one of those pirate systems to tell you what's coming, you won't know what will hit you or when. And then, after it hits you, you won't have FEMA to step in and ensure you have a place to stay if your home is destroyed and provide essentials like food and water. There'll be no engineers to check whether or not the air or the ground are safe for you to return home. They're also tinkering with the 13th and 14th Amendments. In fact, the Constitution was taken down from the White House website. Isn't that interesting? The 13th Amendment allows convicts to be essentially slaves, providing free labor, which some states and large corporations are already taking advantage of. This removes some lower-tier jobs that free civilians need and would willingly do. But hey, when it comes to corporate greed, even paying minimum wage takes too much out of their pocket. The 14th Amendment, which gives birthright citizenship, believe it or not, to Native Americans and also to Black people, is also in the crosshairs. With our current Supreme Court, it's closer to being abolished than you think. Needless to say, we Black folks have 0% interest in filling the jobs vacated by those being deported. We fought for our freedom and our rights and continue to do so to this day. And we will protect ourselves and our freedom, paid for in blood, by any means necessary. So, there's really no good news for anyone right now unless you're rich. Instead of reveling in the small joys of watching somebody else suffer, you might want to prepare for your suffering because it's coming. That brings me to a word that's popular at the moment, and that word is empathy. A couple of podcasts ago, I put out the episode Empathy in Crisis, Mastering Disaster Etiquette. When Bishop Marianne Budd had the unmitigated gall to suggest that the coming administration practice empathy with their plans, she was swiftly condemned. It went as far as one pastor saying not to practice the sin of empathy. The sin of empathy. At that point, many of us realized that the world was upside down, or we've moved into an alternative universe. Regardless of our belief system, we were taught certain things that make us good people, and one of those things is empathy. Empathy is throughout the Bible, but man has now decided it's a sin. Worshipping rich men and money and trashing any semblance of what Christianity was supposed to be is apparently trendy now. This is why I've always said some of the best people I've ever met in my life were atheists, and some of the worst people I met in my life went to church every Sunday. You shouldn't need a book to give you a moral compass. If you do, maybe you were never a good person. Judging by how people act now, I think that's the case for many. Even those who claim to have read the Bible seem only to remember the Cliff Notes version written by a reality show scriptwriter. So, if empathy is a sin, I'm a happy sinner, and I'll continue to have empathy. Empathy is why you're hearing this podcast. Empathy is the communities coming together and trying to find a way to weather the storm that is America's future, which I've championed from the beginning. Empathy is believing what we see with our own eyes and will not be gaslit. We know people are hurting or will be hurt, and we're trying to figure out how to make a difference. I wish I knew the lady who posted this initially to give her the proper credit. and I'll paraphrase a little bit. Her goal was to explain the difference between polite and kind, and she used the example of a woman having a flat tire. The polite person will roll up, ask if she's okay, and ask if there's anything they can do without making any motion of getting out of the car to actually help. It's a half-hearted attempt at being thoughtful and making themselves feel good about, quote-unquote, caring. Inevitably, they wave, wish the woman good luck, and drive away. The kind person rolls up and sees a stranded woman with a flat tire. They'll stop and get out. They may cuss and fuss the whole time, but the tire gets changed, and they make sure the lady drives away safely. Kindness is what makes us look beyond the surface. Kindness makes us look beyond ourselves, and we may have to sacrifice something we need to help out. And if you're being polite to people and calling it friendship, it may be difficult to understand why you no longer have certain relationships. People need kindness, not the superficiality of politeness in an extreme situation. Right now, things are extreme. Many saw it coming. And at the end of the day, knowing that people would be separated from their families, knowing some people would not have enough money for food, knowing children would be impacted, knowing other women would be impacted, that you're brown, Black, and LGBTQIA friends or relatives you're so fond of trotting out to make you look and feel unprejudiced would be vulnerable to loss of rights and attacks. That was okay because it's not your problem, is it? But that's not friendship, it's selfishness. Trust holds relationships together, and those of us who screamed that all of the above things would damage us all in so many ways can no longer trust a lot of people we thought cared about us. In prepping, trust is very important, and it's become very clear that we must vet our allies carefully. There's no middle anymore. Whether that was part of the plan or not, here we are. Once you lose trust in any relationship, no one wants you around, especially when there's hardship. We must all be careful of what we tell people and maintain our situational awareness. These are all things I discussed before. If you're a new listener, I invite you to listen to past episodes because everything that I talked about is happening. All of the things that I advised you to do and have, such as stockpiling food, storing water, having the correct mindset, strengthening your relationship with your children, getting more involved in your community and learning self-defense, dealing with your shortcomings if you overreact or respond badly to stressful situations. If you didn't do any of that work, this flooding the zone tactic has made you stressed, anxious, and afraid. Scrambling for solutions, scrambling for things that may now be too expensive for you, and trying to figure out how to move forward. Or maybe it's been so devastating that all you can do is sit still. I'm concerned about the future of people I know because they're targets. I'm concerned about my future because I'm a candidate for being stopped and having my papers checked like it's 1930s Germany, as I may be mistaken for Latina, but also as a Black person, I'm concerned about what can happen to the 13th and 14th Amendments. Something I don't need is someone who is not part of my demographic telling me that's not going to happen when a whole bunch of things that weren't supposed to happen are happening. Again, empathy. People who are uneasy and uncertain don't need to be poorly placated by someone in a demographic that's not specifically targeted yet. Save the talking points that make you feel better about it, but negate the feelings and experiences of the people at risk. If you can't empathize with them or tell those people that you're a safe place for them, and if they can't trust you to stand up for them, you may as well self-deport yourself out of their lives because you're just another jackass dismissing their concerns. And many of us are tired of being dismissed by people who call themselves, quote-unquote, friends. We need people we can count on without question. The biggest moral conundrum will be having sympathy for those who voted this craziness in. They may soon realize their mistake and want, and dare expect, support. Those same people who didn't care what happened to us. Those who thought only we would get hurt will realize they're in the same boat and will want to come and commiserate, wanting unity, community, and yes, empathy. We'll have to dig deep to give it to them. Schadenfreude may give us some validation now, but it won't stop what's happening around us. We'll soon be at a crossroads where we must decide whether to band together with people we feel betrayed us. These prodigal sons and daughters need to stay off of TikTok, look deep inside, and dig out from the root the need to be better than someone else at their own expense, because that is where the problem lies. Understand this: anyone not part of the 1% are one people. Suppose you continue to shoot yourself in the foot so that other people can't have the same things or the opportunity because you can't compete. In that case, you will never have true community because you've already shown that you will throw people under the bus for a moment of superiority. If you've surrounded yourself with polite people and not kind ones, they'll be too busy looking out for themselves when you most need support. It'll be like looking in the mirror. So I suggest you start liking what you see now before things get any worse. We tried to tell you. Stay safe and stay aware. Focus on the issues that mean the most to you to avoid news burnout and anxiety. Allow yourself time to do something that makes you smile. Get your most essential items now before the tariffs hit. Hold those you love close. Work to strengthen and protect your community. When it gets tough, take a moment and breathe. Try and get your rest. We're all going to need it, and each other. Thanks for listening. Until next time, this is the Urban Lady Prepper signing off. I hope that I've given you some things to think about as you go through the upcoming week. I upload a new podcast every Sunday. Visit my website, urbanladyprepper.com, where I post a new article every Wednesday and Friday. While there, sign up for my weekly newsletter, which contains information that usually isn't on the podcast or website. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and show your support with a donation or buy some Urban Lady Prepper gear. It helps me continue to grow and provide even more content. Join me on the socials. I look forward to hearing from you. Stay safe, stay sharp, and be ready.